everyone. I guess I can lose this for a minute. I'm Terry Thornton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to Tuesday evenings at the Modern. Thank you to our sponsor, Glass Tire, and to all of you on site, and those of you who are online. We're so glad you could join us tonight. This is the last Tuesday evening of the fall 2021 season, and we are ending on a very high note. The interdisciplinary artist and writer Frances Stark is here in conjunction with the Modern's Focus Frances Stark, which was curated by our own Allison Hurst, and opens to the public this weekend. Is that Saturday? Is that Friday? So I invite you to come back for that. Based in Los Angeles with a BA in Humanities from San Francisco State and an MFA from Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, Frances Stark has a generous practice of paying attention, processing through personal experience, and sharing abundantly with wit and poignancy that makes her work engaging, relatable, and enduring for those who encounter it in all of its various forms. I might have, personally, I think I first encountered the work through her book, Frances Stark, Collected Writing, 1993 through 2003, which had me following the sources of each entry, such as the essays that appeared in her column Type for the publication Art Text, and directed me to her art, which I have to say has been recognized in major exhibitions across the globe, such as being included in the 2008 and 2017 Whitney Biennial, the 54th and 57th Venice Biennales, Frances Stark, 1991 to 2015, was a mid-career survey at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. In 2019, a little more recently, solo exhibitions have included U.S. Greatest Hits Mixtape, Volume 1 at Friedman Fitzpatrick in Paris, and Lonely and Abandoned on the Marketplace at Gallery Buchholz in Berlin. As a result of an impressive exhibition record, Frances Stark's work has been included in very significant public collections such as the Whitney Museum of American Art, Tate London, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, Washington, D.C., and in Los Angeles, the L.A. MoCA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and UCLA Hammer Museum. The list goes on, but time is short and limited, and I know we all want to get to what brought us here tonight. Tonight's program is sure to be special as it sets us up for the Focus exhibition and just gives us more to think about, generally and specifically. So if you would, please join me in showing our warm appreciation to Frances Stark.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me here. Thank you for coming. I'm so honored to have been invited to make this exhibition. I have done a few things since my show, but when I did that show, it was a lot. It was a lot to take 25 years worth of work and orchestrate it into a space and kind of try to make sense for a broad audience. And it's quite a emotional sort of moment in life to sort of look at yourself in that way. And so after the work that's in this show is all kind of after that. And I did do a few exhibitions after but within a couple years, I kind of withdrew from a professional practice, not totally, but I had to move out of my studio for 25 years, and I moved into this weird house. So I feel like I've been in a cave or underground, and obviously in the last 2 years I have been. So I wanted to share with you, since you haven't seen the exhibition yet, I wanted to share some things, some kind of behind the scenes things, and just so hopefully touch on the various ways of how my work intertwines and sort of feeds off different stories from different things. Because this is a show that's all paintings, which is very weird. I did do that recently in Berlin at the Buchholz show that Terry mentioned, but it's unusual because I am not a painter. I'm not a crafty, amazing painter. But I do love my paintings, and I hope you will like them too. So anyway, I am starting with a little, so this is one scene of just to talk about, like, I'm not primarily a painter. There's so many other things going on in the work. And I wanted to give this one view of, this is maybe one of 6 huge rooms at the Hammer. And in the center is this rug. And this is the first thing I ever really made kind of before I even started graduate school. And so it was kind of cool to incorporate it. And it had sat kind of, in the, whatever. It was in my studio, no one was paying attention to it, but we kind of brought it out for this show. In fact, I just, you've seen the advert, the sort of promo image of this kind of messy house with Sluggo. So I thought this image was funny that it corresponded with that. And this was, I had met some young guy, and he ended up, I wasn't using my studio a lot at the time, and so I let him stay there. And I came in one day, and I was like, oh my God, he's sleeping on my art. And he was a slob. So yeah, okay, I put that in there as a reminder. Just, that's me right here. Okay, so this is just a picture, a little glimpse into the show downstairs. So, Trapped in the VIP, I put that in there because that appears in one of the paintings as a phrase, and I wanted to kind of open that up a little bit. Trapped in the VIP is a kind of, because I write, this is a little booklet. I also did this book called The Architect and the Housewife. So I like these kind of titles that I can that are like umbrellas that I can kind of keep bringing ideas underneath. So Trapped in the VIP was a story that developed out of an invitation to do a kind of artist project at an art fair. And it was a kind of a weird, almost ridiculous idea, like doing something in the VIP cars. So it was an audio piece that people driving to the Freeze Fair could listen to in the VIP car, which struck me as a little bit ridiculous, so I wanted to push that a little bit. And so the story, what happened was, it ended up being this, it turned into it impacted my studio practice and my life in a very big way. And so what it was an encounter with a kind of street hustler that was around the time of the Trayvon Martin killing. So it was reflecting on a lot of different of these issues, and I made friends with the guy, and he brought a friend in, and this is us working on the audio. And that's Arlo. He's now here, grown up.
All night, long day's work, we just wrapping it up.
Anyway, also you could see a resemblance between the Sluggo painting and my studio. And so Bobby, I met him on that project, he ended up basically just becoming a part of my studio. And we were quite close, we still are close friends. And so this is that same studio, that horrible mess, and he and his friend Chele are, fixing it up for an art show that Bobby curated. And here they are in another part of my studio helping me make some work. And then here is that same studio several years later. It has work from Sharon Lockhart, work from Henry Taylor, work from Jason Meadows, yeah, and it had Silke Otto Knapp and some other people. And so in a sort of short span of time, this kind of, the way my studio functions, this is just to highlight, I'm not a painter per se, I do a lot of different things, but the way my studio functions is it's very open, and it kind of, I open myself to this kind of, these relationships where, I could teach these guys about art and they could teach me about life, and we had a fantastic exchange that's still to this day developing, and Bobby's hopefully about to start a gallery himself. So, and then this is a painting that's actually in the exhibition downstairs, and this is a two-part painting. So what it is the window, you hang it on either, it's hanging, when you're in one room, you can't see it. So this was I made this specifically for my son's father had a gallery called China Art Objects in Los Angeles for many years, and they had to kind of close the gallery down, and then they moved to Mexico. But before they did, they had a little gallery in their house, and so they invited me to be in it. And so I made this specifically to the size of their living room. And so this part was hung in Arlo's bedroom. No offense, Arlo, it wasn't about. And then the other part was in the living room. So it was just a kind of, that was just an opportunity to play around with making a work in a non-institutional setting that was very personal, with a lot of personal connections, and to kind of play and innovate with this idea of a two-sided painting. And then another thing, okay, so this is again back to the room, and then in the background there's this book, there's a painting called Course of Empire, and then there's also a painting that's from a series called Censorship Now. And this is the Course of Empire painting. And so this is, again, this is a very recent painting made, in the last several years, but what's depicted in the painting is a catalog that I was commissioned to write for. And it's Ed Ruscha, when he did the Venice Biennale, I forgot what year it was, I think it was 2005 maybe, and that was the name of his exhibition. And I was invited to write about Ed Ruscha alongside Joan Didion, and that was, when they asked me that, that was like Miss America, like streaming mascara with like a crown on my head. That was really a highlight for me and so this is also to emphasize a kind of, that it was cool that Terry brought up the art and text column, because I feel like as an artist, as my voice really developed publicly and was taken seriously, because I actually wrote columns that were thoughtful and strange, and so I have my approach to my art practice is not so specific. It's been this kind of wandering thing, and writing has been a key component in it. So I have been invited to write about other artists. And so this is kind of, the white glove of the gallery, holding this kind of very rare, it's like this really kind of cheap production, like when you look at it, it's like, what? But it's like, you can't find those, they're like $800 or something. But, so I'm also very interested in the economy of writing versus the economy of visual art, which comes up in the Censorship Now. Okay, this is the American Pavilion where Ed Ruscha did the show. Here's a little bit glimpse while we're installing today. So that's a piece from Censorship Now. This one is not in the show, but that's the opening page. And so this was a series of 8 paintings that I made for the Biennale, the Whitney Biennial. And Ian Svenonius is a kind of underground music icon. He's extremely funny, and he's been in bands for, ever. He's from the DC hardcore scene, and he wrote a book called Psychic Soviet and how to, I'm not gonna get the titles right, but anyways, a fantastic writer and a super charismatic, interesting person who does not really fit into how things are going. Anyway, he had signed, so you see his signature is actually printed in the book, and the way he signed it was with the word sincerely, and that moved me. So, Francis, you're number one. Anyway. And so Ian was a kind of, I think he probably got paid like $4,000 to do the book, which was a lot of writing. And he is this, a critic, and he also used to have an interview show where he interviewed every icon, Henry Rollins, Jello Biafra, all the Dinosaur Jr., you name it, all the kind of iconic alternative music people. So he's quite engaged in this other thing that we call art that's not the museum world. And so this text that he had written, I read it, and I was bowled over by this text. And it's a kind of Jonathan Swift modest proposal. So except for, he really is crying censorship now, but what he's saying is censor the state. So, but he's also saying, like, what is this freedom of expression? Like, what is it really that we have? So he's really needling you to think about this. When the state, like a rampaging mob boss, systematically destroys its opponents, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Mossadegh, Lumumba, Salvador Allende, Che Guevara, Gaddafi, Fred Hampton, Orlando Letelier, Oscar Romero, nuns in El Salvador, untold numbers in Vietnam, Guatemala, Honduras, Laos, Cambodia, Palestine, Afghanistan, Haiti, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Cuba, Angola, Iraq, et al. How are we to interpret their patronizing embrace of the arts? With the regime reacting to its foes with such virility, how can the artist class not recognize the free rein extended to them as the ultimate put down? The relegation of their work to sophomoric vanity. If art can change the world, which of course it can and does, isn't the freedom of expression doctrine really just a way to demote it to a theoretical gulag of absolute impotence and irrelevance? That's the kind of hard-hitting part, and that question was very, I think I'm still asking that question, and I think that that's also part of why I'm kind of retreated from participating at the, kind of constant level that I had been participating. And then in that book also, I think I did these out of order, but in that book also, he's talking about the torture, apologist of torture. In this show, I have a painting. This is 2 details. I thought we'd be able to read it. It's from someone who was detained for 17 years in Guantanamo. And it's a very moving book. So you saw that it earlier had a fire in the background. So I'm basically reading this Guantanamo diary on my laptop. And so those questions, those kind of difficult questions about the state kind of were weighing heavy on me, and somebody actually invited me to do a proposal for the Biennale to actually represent the United States. So I had been in the Biennale twice before, but this time a curator came to me and said, why don't you put together a proposal that you would be like the big artist in the pavilion? And I was like, whoa, that's not really, we worked on it, and I kind of came up with an idea. And then, of course, when it came time to get the backing and the funding, no one would back me or fund me because I'm not a big money artist. And so it didn't go anywhere. but I kind of felt a little bit of like, wow, what if Frances Stark could represent the USA? What would that look like? So I decided that after I was kicked out of I wasn't kicked out. My rent went up and weird things were happening. I had to leave my studio of 18 years. And so but I couldn't leave the city where I was because my son was in school. So I had to rent. I found this place that was big enough that I could live and have a studio. So we found this like bizarro, like weird cocaine mansion place. And I thought, this is so perfect. I could make this and put this in my work, and it's so weird, and blah, blah, blah. So that's what I've been working on, kind of, it's a little bit all over the place, but this also appears in this one painting, not this, but just the phrase, the American Pavilion. So I wanted to point that out, just to show that I'm doing all these other kinds of things that aren't necessarily just, something within boundaries on campus, which I also, of course, totally revere. It's not a tongue-in-cheek endeavor. But in the pavilion, when they invited me, I actually had all the documents, and they were like, okay, you're basically going to be dealing with the State Department. And it's like, okay, I already ran down that list with the bloody underlines. We know what our State Department is like. So it was the kind of first, it was a kind of funny catalyst for me to think about having a direct relationship with somebody in the State Department, like that I had to email. And then I'm not going through the whole show piece by piece, but this is also in the exhibition, and it's just something I made for an art fair, but it's what it is. It's an original Raymond Pettibone catalog that I have on my lap, so you can see through the Xerox page the Jesus Saves on the one side. So you could see what's going on there. But Raymond is another artist like Ed Ruscha that I had been commissioned to write about. So I was recently commissioned to write about his work for the New Museum exhibition that happened a couple years ago. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to present to you an illustrated presentation of that text that I had given in the pavilion for my son and his friends. So we started doing these little get-togethers with the teenagers because they didn't have school, in-person school, and their art summer school was canceled, and they wanted to connect with each other and think about art. So I started having them come over. So I'm going to now read you the essay I wrote for Raymond as it's illustrated for my son and his friends. And we had to change the font, so it used to have a cool font. An actor fond of cowboy attire who helped the FBI purge the entertainment industry of political radicals while president of its primary labor union, was serving his first term as president of the United States. I was in my first term at a high school that boasted of having educated Steve Jobs. This was the year I encountered the art of Raymond Pettibone. Alone in my room, gripping a 12-inch vinyl record sleeve in both hands, I sat engrossed while a vocalist with the impossible name Chavo Paterist cried out through my stereo speakers, "Promises you made never become fact. We're gonna get revenge. You won't know what hit you. We're tired of being screwed." Okay, so Chavo Paterist, apparently a mean-spirited moniker assigned to Ron Reyes, who had left the band before the record's release. The name essentially means boy pedophile, an insulting yet witty merger of abuser and abused. 35 years and only 4 US presidents later, well, I had to put the rap albums in there so they could get a sense of time. My empty hands rest on my 12-inch MacBook, leaden and paralyzed, as though my typewriter, come stereo, come newsstand, come photo album, come mailbox, come dictionary, come TV, has pilloried me for the crimes of stalling in deep thought. I look up and see these words erupting from a wide open mouth in a Pettibone print that hangs in my home. I heard a new voice, rapid and incisive, the real straight dope. The expression, so vivid, so portentous, was one I had never heard. Drawing a connection between the vocalist, tired of being screwed, and Pettibone's rendition of Vavoom is not something I do lightly. My intention is not to foreground the relationship between the band and the artist, but rather to provide a glimpse into the historical milieu from which I glean my understanding of the artist's contribution to American culture and its significance for any close reader of that culture. My hope is to succinctly honor the resonance of Raymond Pettibone's remarkable voice across an awkwardly specific span. But this span is not merely a career arc across decades within institutions of fine art and higher learning, but a voice heard across a hideously divided American landscape. Pettibone's work impacted me deeply before I had any expectations or knowledge of art. Over a decade after discovering him, I unexpectedly zeroed in on the field of contemporary art as a worthwhile place to accrue debt in order to develop my own voice. That's Art Center. And that is the bridge where the library was, where I met my son's father. Cool building. And was surprised to discover that he was a player in that very field, which admittedly lent countercultural pedigree to this odd new realm of porous scholarship and upscale socializing. I thought maybe we needed to work on some definitions, but you guys know all those. Through two of my most revered mentors, both inside and outside of my institutional gateway to the art world, so these are my mentors, Mike Kelly and Dennis Cooper, I was introduced to Raymond and invited to act, which is a stretch, in an experimental video, The Holes You Feel, not unlike his better-known darkly comic reenactments of fringe American history, such as Citizen Tanya or Sir Drone, a new film about the new Beatles. And that's Mike Kelly with the guitar. I'm mellow. So Mike starred in Sir Drone. And there's the Patty Hearst. If they didn't, the teenagers don't know who Patty Hearst is and what that kidnapping was, so I put this background information. What a guy. We must be alarmingly enterprising, and we must be startlingly original and do new and striking things which constitute a revolution of yellow journalism. This afforded me an opportunity to grapple with the ramifications of the messy wedding of pop, celebrity, and conceptual art while simultaneously glimpsing how countercultural ideologies collapse into cliché. Why don't I have a picture? More profoundly, I was allowed to discover his reading habits, which helped me gain insight into how an extraordinary and voracious mind made the pleasure of his boundless contemplation manifest. The first Pettibone I ever encountered, besides the Black Flag bars themselves, which formed the band's logo, was the art on Black Flag's Jealous Again EP in the summer of 1981, a year after its release. Shortly thereafter, I purchased the single Six Pack, whereby it became clear that this was what art on Black Flag albums and flyers looked like. I didn't think about who drew it, but about how it was drawn and what the drawing had depicted. In the case of Six Pack, an anxious kid who had expressed himself into a corner with a can of paint. Again, the artist's name didn't prompt me to value it, but the art and its context did. The clean and concise iconography of the Black Flag bars, which remains an extraordinarily impactful and ubiquitous non-morphing and non-corporate logo, had not yet become a universal signifier for punk rock, but rather was an extremely effective logo that prompted me to probe further and ask myself, what is the significance of the name Black Flag? Someone I know suggests that Raymond copied it. He was inspired by the MIT Press logo. I went to my school library and discovered that it symbolized the opposite of the white flag, which I already knew meant surrender, and thus it stood for surrender's opposite, or rather defiance. It was the flag used by anarchist labor activists and revolutionaries, which did not mean exactly what my mother told me, a state of lawless chaos, but rather a rejection of illegitimate hierarchies. Although a state of lawless chaos might be more applicable to it today, but the guitar tones and the vocals were elixir to my 14-year-old ears, yet the abrasiveness of Jealous Again's cover art didn't go down as easily. It was a nuanced mockery that didn't occupy the accepted form of caricature like the deftly rendered satire of Mad Magazine or the off-color greeting cards illustrating misshapen men nursing hangovers or goosing nurses. It was simply like nothing else I had ever seen. Two high school cheerleaders, majorettes, in cowboy hats and boots are shown in a spirited and unflattering frenzy. On closer inspection, one is actually pulling the other's hair and appears not to be twirling her baton, but to be wielding it like a billy club. Turning the album over leads to the discovery that this isn't an eruption of team spirit, and that the gun that one of them holds is not a thematic prop, but an actual weapon with which she has shot, in a jealous rage, someone she's meant to be rooting for. Blood drips from the bullet wound in the forehead of a guy in a Letterman jacket. The cheerleader's text bubble contains this grimly ironic plea. Before you die, tell me that you'll always love me. Despite the fact that I didn't harbor much envy or sympathy for the accepted paragons of virtue, high schoolers in Letterman jackets or their miniskirt-clad team-spirited counterparts, the unflattering depiction of their distorted faces and limbs was effectively unsettling. They were sexualized but not sexy. They were base, violent, out of control, criminal even. The driving force of the image was the uncustomary ugliness of typically wholesome figures, the central protagonists of American culture, purveyors of team spirit, seen turning on each other in a violent, competitive rage. I wasn't yet fully accustomed to seeing antagonists on album sleeves, but rather protagonists, enviable visages. The norm existed in the next room where my sister would gaze at the sweat-dampened Vaseline lens face of Olivia Newton-John before getting physical with a rigorous sit-up routine. Alas, the routine of cultural reproduction. One of the most basic characteristics that distinguishes what art has to offer its audience from ordinary products of popular culture is its inherent agreement to last, to speak to a future mind that encounters it about something as small as a glint in the eye, a buzz of a fly, or something as unwieldy as the topic of their shared humanity or lack thereof. We live in an age where art is celebrated for its ability to function as a financial instrument and for how well it can fill certain people with the desire to possess it. Pop culture repackaged with a luxury price tag or an enviable visage on a sleeve with no record inside. Pettibone's work flies a different flag. It is an invitation to escape from the relentless tyranny of now that keeps us hooked to the irresistible fruit of American empire. At its core, it is a ruthlessly serious ode to close reading, an embodiment of a multitude of voices born out of the dialogue between the living and the dead that great art and writing have always made possible. The great writers knew that thought is subversive. They challenged and critiqued the dominant narrative, assumptions, and structures that buttress power. They freed us. They did not cater to the latest fashions of the academy or popular culture. They did not seek adulation. They did not build pathetic monuments to themselves. They elucidated difficult and hard truths. They served humanity. They lifted up voices the power elites seek to discredit, marginalize, or crush. To quote again from the same Pettibone print that hangs in my home, he broods at a much deeper level than language or even thought. We shall not wish our boys to sing like mere birds. Small songs do not take care of it. And then I'm just going to segue into a whole other thing here. So we can take the lights down a little. This is just a little promo for a big song that I worked. My deepest motivation is to sort of connect with people, and people typically don't think that they can connect with art. They think, oh, art is above my head, or art is pretentious, or whatever, and then when they see, like, oh, by reading it more closely, we can kind of understand how is it significant for us today.
Something, they sit next to their colleagues, their friends, they make music together. When you get exposed to kids who are learning about art in a real way, it's like, oh my God, they're so hungry and smart and alive.
You know, they play music, and that's the universal language. You've got every race in there, you've got different ages in there, all in one room having a great time.
It was very serendipitous how I wound up working with a youth orchestra. But I think that the significance of this choice reflects my interest in trying to speak to a broader audience. Good.
This opera kind of showcases the magic of teaching.
Understanding that there is a sort of joy in sharing deeper thought is so impactful for students. The message of the Magic Flute is that music has an emancipatory power.
questions? I could keep talking.
I'll start with a question. So, can you talk a little bit about your experience coming into art from a humanities background? I think I understood that you got into grad school without having an undergraduate degree in art, and that sort of set you up to be something different within that context. And just, I mean, maybe a little bit about like how you navigated that, but also how people received it, you know, not having a place to put you, to understand this is what she does, she fits here kind of thing. What was that experience?
Well, I think at the time when I did make that transition, I had a professor in conceptual design who was involved in the contemporary art scene, and he was very encouraging for me to apply. And I had, I had found in the art courses an outlet for the kind of incredible energy and enthusiasm that I was having intellectually in my intellectual history courses. And it was a kind of postmodern moment where you had this kind of stuff like the V girls, or that, that where it was heavily, they say theory, even though that's not, but it was not a kind of craft heavy figurative moment in art. So it was a very easy transition. So it wasn't until, so I started learning about contemporary artists, and I learned about Mike Kelly, and I was really bowled over. And then I saw him give a talk at the Art Institute, and I was like, I want to study with him. That's what I want. Because he was a kind of fusion. He felt very punk rock to me, which was such a kind of huge. I don't really love what punk rock kind of represents now. Like from this distance, it doesn't make a ton of sense. But at the time, it was hugely impactful on my learning, and it prepped me for for college or whatever. But so Mike seemed to embody, he was a kind of mix of like the MC5 and Sun Ra, and he spoke about them, later when I worked with him studied with him. But his presentation, it was very class-based. He was dealing with things that they just made sense to me without me having a kind of art history background. It was very accessible. And but when I got there, I was like, oh God, I actually don't know anything. And but that was okay, I learned. But what I did was one of my teachers, Buzz Spector, was teaching a Dennis Cooper novel, Frisk, and I freaked out and how I loved it so much, and I wrote him like a fan letter. And Frisk is like violent, insane. I mean, it is really an insane book, but it like the capacity that it was so sublime and so beautiful, and it really, with subject matter that I would never think. I'm not a horror person. That's not my thing. Anyway, Dennis just moved me so deeply that I wrote him a fan letter. And then I ran into him at Richard Tejas Gallery in Los Angeles, which is no longer there. And he said, I'm doing a writing workshop through Beyond Baroque, and which has a kind of punk rock connection too. And it's going to be in my house, and you should take it. So I took the writing workshop while I was just starting the graduate program at Art Center. And so I was able to function as a writer at the same time I was kind of figuring out the art thing and the studio practice. And so I had that kind of I was kind of immersed in Dennis's world, which was connected to, I don't know if you guys know Bookworm, that it's like an NPR show. Maybe, I don't know if it went everywhere, but Michael Silverblatt was in my class. All kinds of people who became, kind of pretty interesting. But, you know, it was a literary scene. It was a true scene. It wasn't, you know, you just sat in his living room and discussed what you wrote, and it was fantastic. It was very, very different from the more art school. So I found my people, you know, I found it. I had a foot in both, and that's how I managed. And I think that Mike Kelly and Stephen Prina, two of my, and the women, Liz Larner and Patty Podesta, we had a fantastic program. They were very, very encouraging. And so that, it wasn't, I didn't feel like I was out in left field or whatever. But it resurfaced when I got my job. I got a tenure track job at USC teaching. And so that's when that kind of, the division between a kind of really fun, you know, between the sort of more intellectual, kind of cultural queries were very, very distinct from the kind of design 101 stuff. And that was a harder bridge to bridge in a university setting. As a professor? Yeah, as a professor in a kind of, because the you know, as you know, the faculties are the governing, they're running this, you know, they're administrating. And so we had huge issues with trying to actually focus on how do you develop a curriculum. One of my first things when I got there was to do a symposium called On the Future of Art School. And I didn't know they had it all in their head that what they meant by the future of art school was online. Or like, you know, Apple, we want Apple on board. You know, but they got Apple on board and then I resigned. But, you know, anyway, yeah, she the school wanted, then finally when, you know, whatever, however many years later that was, 10 years later, their big thing was like, the future of art is Mark Zuckerberg. So I don't know if any of you saw the metaverse ad with the Rousseau painting. Woo-hoo, look it up. It's not pretty. So I hope the future of art is not Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah.
I got to ask you about that font that you said you couldn't use anymore. Was that some proprietary deal?
No, it was because it didn't work on their computer. No, but the uh-oh font, it's actually, what's cool about that is my friend Chris Svensson, who's a designer I've been working with for years, I met him on a project, and I did a show at Nottingham, and we just hit it off so well. I had him move to California, back to California, and he worked with me. And this font was something I found in a font book, so it didn't exist digitally, and I had used it for something. And he basically created the font for me. So he reconstructed it. It was called Buckshot, and so we called it Airsoft because we were really into Airsoft. So he actually made the font, functional digital font, and we used it in my Hammer catalog. And the other font is this really cool font, the one that with the American Pavilion that had the the arrows. That's the one, he didn't make that up, but he turned me on to that. So yeah, I have in the font, and then when you see the opera, so what you saw in the end, the musical sequence was from the Magic Flute. So what I did was I took the whole libretto and I assigned for each character they got a font. And I used for Papageno, I used Comic Sans, which is the most hated, ridiculed font. And it was because the whole thing, and Papageno's character is played by the writer of the opera, the librettist, Schikaneder. So he was the one who, you know, got Mozart to collaborate to do this at the People's Theater. And so it was the first non-court opera that Mozart had done. And they did it together. And you can tell the beginning is like hilarious. You know, like the first couple of scenes or whatever, they're like, you know, drunk and figuring it all out. Then it gets kind of like overbearing or whatever. But there is this incredible collaboration that is at the heart of that opera. And it's one of the most popular produced operas that is always really over the top because of the Masonic imagery and everything. And what I find is that most people don't know what it's about. So I was trying to produce a work of art that was an interpretation, like a literal word for word sort of presentation of the libretto. So you didn't have to worry about the German. You can just like, so what I did was I made it so that it was syllabically, you could read, I had to match English syllables to the melody. So the vocal melodies, you only saw the kids playing the orchestra, but the kids also did the vocals. So they each were assigned wind instruments to do the vocal parts. And so that way you can follow, you can read along. Because if you're at the opera, anyone who goes to the opera, you are looking at the little readout, and it's like way off. It's like, oh, it's not at the same time. And you're looking here, you're looking there. This is like, no, just go into the words and feel how the words go. Because if you can, I remember, I think when I saw, there's a film by, what's the Swedish guy, so famous?
Bergman.
Yeah, Ingmar Bergman. He did a version of the Magic Flute, and it was so well done, and that's how I kind of really familiarized myself. Arlo was a baby. I don't even know. He was probably like 4 or 5, and we watched it, the Bergman, and when it was over, he said, "Can we watch it again?" That's how good the Bergman Magic Flute is. Anyway, so that was about fonts, but I have a lot to say about fonts. But I use like the most corniest fonts, like, the handsome prince is the apple, I don't even know how to pronounce, Chancery. Just corny, like, system fonts. I love that. But I always have used kind of real banal, everyday objects and, stuff in work that is kind of, sort of patently like high-minded or whatever. So there's always a kind of high-low factor going on. Yeah.
I'm curious about your new studio that you said you were moving into and that practice. You were a little nervous about the transition?
Oh yeah, so I moved into this like that ridiculous house, and I've been there for several years. So everything that is in the show downstairs, if you go see the show, was made in that space, and it's a terrible painting. It's great light, but there's no walls. So I have to like hang things in weird, it's totally ridiculous. It's really, really not a normal studio with carpet. It's just, and the landlord has all these freaky things like a mirrored piano and stuff like that. So, but it is a great American, the idea is that I'm going to, when you go on Zillow or something and you can do the augmented tour of the house. So that's what I'm going to produce. I'm going to basically create that, and then I want to maybe turn it into NFT so I can take my landlord's house and earn some money because I pay him a lot of money. So, but that will function as the pavilion for the biennial, but it's in LA. And it's seriously to your question, it's a little harder to, because when you saw the kids practicing, that was in the same studio that was like sloppy, and the same studio where Bobby had the art show. So that studio was like really easy to like go here, do this, do that. This is like this kind of weird, glamorous, like, it really looks like a drug house. Like I've had people come over like, I didn't really know that about you. And it's like, it's not right. It's totally bizarre. So then that kind of weighs heavy because I'm a kind of bricoleur, so I like to use what's available. And so because the house is such it's a mess. It's an architectural nightmare, really. It's cool, but it's not. So I'm using it as a kind of pedestal, as a kind of found object to produce this thing. And then because it has that kind of pavilion, like, you know, it has a kind of like, from a distance, it looks like really special. So and it's white, and you know, it looks like a pavilion architecture. So I could kind of package a kind of story of my life that is like a different version of the Uh-Oh show. Do you know? It's like the messy stuff, you know, and the kind of the material. And part of it too was, you know, it's high on the hill. It's in the same neighborhood where Mike Kelly lived. And Mike Kelly, you know, my mentor from Art Center, and the reason I went to study art, killed himself in his house on that same ridge. So there's a bit of an homage to Mike and the history of his work and his interests and his influence on me, and the kind of sadness of a kind of exploding art culture that sort of diminishes poetic intelligence. Yeah?
You mentioned a really long hiatus. How did you find yourself coming back to art from that gap?
Well, I guess it's not really a hiatus, because now that I'm sitting here, it's like I just made like a ton of stuff between the time of Uh-Oh and now. So I think that the hiatus was more of a kind of hiatus from answering email. Everyone at this museum knows, like, does she even have email? Because she never writes me back. No, I'm like feral at this point. So it was really more of a like, not kind of like, what I had a studio manager. So what happens is, like, when you're doing shows and making books and all this stuff, and there's so much administration that happens that your kind of my mental space of like just exploring and making mistakes, kind of, it's harder to do that, you know. And when Bobby got involved in my practice so heavily, that was really fantastic for me, because it opened up the possibility of being able to just sit around and talk about art and talk about the books or the catalogs, or to just be a thinker, you know. But when I finished the show and I moved into this house, my studio manager got a really cool, serious job at the Art Institute of Chicago, and I just didn't hire anybody. So I basically just stopped being professional. So that was a hiatus from professional responsibility, which is on one level depressing and disorienting, and on another level allowed me to sort of focus again on the kind of themes that I want to draw out in the Pavilion project, and allowed me to, in the Pavilion project, and like that slide that was the Pavilion, it's like, am I in the empire, or am I in my home? You know, and how am I an inhabitant of that, and how am I part of the regime? Because I'm up here on this bridge looking out, and it's pretty glamorous, but I'm not worried that a bomb is gonna blow the roof off my house. But the amount of bombs that we dropped, you know, I had in another slide, I took it out, it was like, how many a day for the last, whatever, 8, 9, 10, 12 years? I mean, it's insanity. And that's not the extent of our crimes, but that's a pretty big one, you know. So I think that I was really, you know, I started my art career kind of working from home. I didn't have a real studio, and then when I got a real studio, you know, I got more professionally active and more successful. But I do always feel that I'm a bit of a contrarian, or I don't like the big time. I don't get off on being like, I don't want to get bigger and bigger. Emily Dickinson is like my hero. And I think if you're like getting free alcohol at openings for 10 years in a row, you get pretty far away from Emily Dickinson. You know what I'm saying? It's just like endless bottles coming out of nowhere. Like that there is a kind of a culture of productivity and a kind of frenzied market or whatever that sort of like it isn't a contemplative lifestyle,
Hey Francis, maybe this leads into a question I was thinking a lot about your work. The first time I saw your work was in 2017 in the Whitney Biennial, and I just was terrified by these huge pages that you had painted, and the blood drip lines and the stars were like, the scale was so crazy, going from like something that you can hold in your hand to like the scale shift. So, and now hearing you talk about the empire and this house and where you fit in this way of like the viewer's aspect ratio or scale to the object or to the image or to the word. I don't know, I just was curious about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that the reason why I made the painting of that piece, okay, so basically what it was I had read that piece and I was totally floored by it. It was super funny, very crisp, very, very damning and just harsh, but like, yes, thank you for writing this. But also, I had been invited to the thing, and I was like, I just finished this, I don't really have anything like big enough to give for the Whitney. I don't feel I have it in me. And then I thought of Ian's thing, and then I thought, because I could have printed it up as a wallpaper. I didn't have to paint it. But my idea was to bring this kind of harsh criticality of this person into the contemporary art context. I had to sneak it in on stretchers because people love big paintings for good reason. But, also there's a history to that. And I was also interested in the history, like Frances, is it Saunders? Frances Saunders Stoner. She wrote the history of the CIA and the abstract expressionism, all that stuff. So, okay. So anyway, I proposed to the Whitney bring this essay in as, giant paintings, and I just thought they were going to say no, because I never get real estate in a show, ever. I'm like, someone canceled, let's call Francis. I'm like the last on the list, so this was like, would you let me have this much space, And they said yes, and I was like, oh my God. So I did it, and what happened was that you're able to, because the font is kind of like a children's book or something, so because it's so big, it doesn't feel like you're gonna read a chapter. It's easy enough to just breeze through it. So downstairs in this show, there's two. There's two of the 8 that I'm showing here. And so I wanted to bring, Ian's voice in to the show, and because I thought that it was potent, so I wanted to share the stage or whatever, or seed my stage to something else, And so what I did also was I made it so that he would get a percentage of the sales. So he ended up making like $50,000 from that. Plus we did some tote bags. And on the page that he's talking about, he's making fun of like Che Guevara t-shirts or whatever. But anyway, he earned a lot of money, but like way more than he earned from making the book. So I was interested in kind of foregrounding and highlighting these kind of absurd discrepancies in value of producing, valuable culture for capital A art, because the art world thinks very highly of itself and kind of forgets that everyone else out there is hustling, and the kind of technological transformations in terms of these kind of platforms that are supposedly so wonderful about like putting your stuff out there for someone transitioning from like years of a certain type of music industry. You know, suddenly like, oh, I have to be a promoter and a thing, and you know, like it's not a pretty picture for people in counterculture. So I wanted to. The scale was part of trying to amplify his voice and make it available for, you know, the art, the general art, and such a, you know, hugely like trafficked exhibition as that. And then of course it was funny because it was censorship. And a lot of people misread it. They really just thought like it was just saying censor people. No, it's saying censor the state, censor the media. You know, it's an inversion. It's a pretty tough text. It's really fun to read though. But and then in the end, the focus of the biennial was on the Dana Schutz paintings and the censorship of those. So censor the artists. The state is great. Don't get me started. Anyway. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for